There's a very specific moment in attraction that most men completely miss. It's not when she gets louder. It's not when she argues more. It's actually the opposite. It's when she stops explaining herself, stops justifying, stops trying to make you understand her thoughts, her mood, her behavior. And here's the uncomfortable part. This is usually not a sign of emotional distance first. It's a sign that something in the dynamic has already shifted inside her. Because when a woman still cares how she's being understood, she stays engaged. But when she stops trying to be understood, she's already repositioning herself emotionally. So the real question is this: what changes in a woman's mind when she no longer feels the need to explain herself to you? And more importantly, what does it mean for how she feels about you? Because in this video, you're going to understand a very subtle but powerful psychological shift that happens in relationships and attraction dynamics. We're not talking about games or manipulation. We're talking about emotional investment patterns, identity signaling, and what psychologists call withdrawn justification behavior, when someone stops defending their internal world in a connection. By the end of this, you'll understand why silence is not always distance, why explanation is not always intimacy, and why the absence of justification can sometimes mean the relationship is entering a completely different emotional phase. And once you see this pattern, you won't misread women the same way again. Let's go deeper. Think about the early stage of any connection. She explains things, she clarifies her mood, she gives reasons for why she's busy, why she replied late, why she reacted a certain way. A man might think this is just communication. But psychologically, explanation is actually a form of emotional investment. Because when someone explains themselves, they are actively trying to maintain connection and prevent misunderstanding. That takes emotional energy. In attachment psychology, this aligns with what's called repair behavior, the instinct to fix emotional gaps before they become distance. But here's the key insight: people don't keep repairing what they no longer value the same way. So when explanation disappears, something else has replaced it. Not always loss, but emotional repositioning. And this is where most men start misreading the situation. Let's go deeper. There is a quiet psychological shift that happens before emotional detachment becomes visible. She stops trying to be understood and starts deciding internally instead. You might notice it like this: she doesn't argue anymore. She doesn't clarify anymore. She doesn't correct your assumptions about her. At first, this feels like maturity, and sometimes it is, but psychologically, it often signals something deeper. She has reduced emotional dependency on your interpretation of her. In simpler terms, she is no longer organizing her emotional state around your perception. And when that happens, attraction doesn't immediately disappear, but it changes shape. Because now she is no longer building understanding with you. She is observing whether understanding is even necessary anymore. And that shift is subtle, but powerful. Transitioning from this, we need to understand what replaces explanation. When a woman feels emotionally safe and connected, she explains herself because she cares about alignment. But when she begins to feel internally resolved, something changes. She no longer needs external validation for her emotional state. This is closely tied to emotional self-regulation, the ability to process feelings internally without needing external confirmation. And this is where men often get confused, because self-sufficiency can look like disinterest. But here's the truth. She is no longer asking, "Do you understand me?" She is now asking internally, "Do I even need to explain this anymore?" And once that question becomes internal instead of relational, the dynamic shifts from connection building to evaluation. But there's a darker misunderstanding that comes next. A lot of men make a critical error here. They think, "She's calmer now, things are better." But silence in emotional expression doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means reduced emotional output toward the connection. There's a concept in psychology called emotional withdrawal with functional interaction. It means a person still engages, but no longer emotionally invests in explanation or repair. So she still replies, she still talks, she still behaves normally, but something is missing: the effort to be emotionally understood. And this is where attraction starts shifting quietly, not loudly. Because attraction doesn't collapse in explosions, it dissolves in reductions. And now we reach the most important behavioral indicator. This is the real turning point. Not anger, not arguments, not distance. It's correction stopping. When she no longer corrects your misunderstandings about her, she is no longer emotionally invested in reshaping your perception. For example, if you assume something about her mood and she doesn't clarify it anymore, that is not neutrality. That is detachment from interpretation. Psychologically, this aligns with reduced identity signaling, meaning she is no longer trying to control how she is emotionally defined in your mind. And when that disappears, emotional intimacy begins to fade even if communication remains. Now, here's the transition most men never see coming. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever noticed that the most confusing phase in relationships is not when she is angry, but when she becomes calm in a way that feels slightly distant? Because here's the counterintuitive truth. A woman who still argues with you is often still emotionally engaged, but a woman who no longer feels the need to explain or correct you might already be emotionally reorganizing her attachment to the connection itself. That's not always the end of attraction, but it is always the end of the old version of it. Now let's go deeper into what this actually means for you. One of the biggest misconceptions about attraction is that it disappears suddenly. In reality, attraction rarely dies. It relocates. When explanation stops, emotional energy doesn't vanish. It gets redirected inward or elsewhere. This can mean self-focus. It can mean emotional independence. It can sometimes mean reduced emotional priority of the relationship. The key idea is this. She is no longer spending emotional energy trying to maintain shared understanding. And when shared understanding is no longer actively maintained, emotional closeness begins to thin out, even if nothing obvious has changed. This is why some men feel, she's still here, but something is different. Yes, something is different. The emotional maintenance layer is gone. And that brings us to the deeper truth. Most men underestimate this. Understanding is not just communication, it's bonding. When someone explains themselves, they are building a bridge between inner experience and shared reality. That bridge is intimacy. So when explanation stops, the bridge is no longer being maintained. And without maintenance, emotional closeness slowly becomes observational closeness. She is still present, but less emotionally reachable. Not because she hates you, not because something dramatic happened, but because the emotional mechanism of connection has reduced its activity. And now we reach the emotional core of this entire pattern. At the deepest level, this isn't about women stopping explanation. This is about emotional effort and perceived emotional safety. People don't explain themselves endlessly to those they feel emotionally disconnected from. But they also stop explaining themselves when they no longer need the relationship to stabilize their identity. And here's the part most men miss completely. When a woman stops explaining herself to you, it is not always rejection. Sometimes it is emotional independence forming. But here is the truth that matters most. The quality of your connection is no longer being shaped by communication. It is being shaped by emotional necessity. If she still feels emotionally invested in being understood by you, she explains. She engages. She clarifies. If she no longer feels that need, the relationship doesn't break immediately. It slowly changes structure. And whether that change becomes distance or deeper respect depends on something very simple. Whether emotional safety still exists between you or not. Not control, not intensity, safety. And once you understand this, you stop panicking at silence and start reading patterns instead of reacting to them. If this perspective resonated with you, don't just watch it and move on. Notice where you may have misread silence or emotional withdrawal in your own experiences. Because awareness changes how you show up in relationships more than any technique ever will. And I'm curious about this. Have you ever experienced someone becoming quieter, not angry, just less explanatory? What did you think it meant at the time? Drop that in the comments. In the next video, we're going to go deeper into something even more misunderstood. Why emotional distance sometimes increases attraction instead of killing it, and when that pattern is healthy versus destructive. Until then, understand this. In relationships, what is no longer explained is often what is quietly being reevaluated.